Hello and welcome to the first video episode of the Cricketeers, where we talk about the beautiful game of cricket. This week, we were treated to a phenomenal test match. Honestly, I know I'm biased, but the best I've seen since Headingley in England, that fateful few summers ago, pre-COVID. Today with me, I have Adam Bell and Danyal Rasool of Cricinfo, and we will be breaking down the amazing match that we got to see between Pakistan and New Zealand. First of all, Danyal, welcome to your first episode of the Cricketeers.
Thank you, Tasneem. Do I call you Tasneem?
You can call me Tasneem. You can call me whatever you like, really. As long as it's not a derogatory term, I'm okay with it.
Okay. No, I had no idea. Yeah, lovely to be here.
It's really nice to have you, and it's nice to have a holistic Pakistani voice breaking down what we got to see. You obviously were writing for Cricinfo during that game. What was it like staying up all hours of the night in a horrendous time zone for you to get that done?
I generally pride myself on being a night owl. I like to stay up past 4 a.m., 5 a.m. So for a while I thought I got this. But after a session and a half, and the way the pitch was playing, and the way it never looked like initially Kane Williamson or Ross Taylor were going to get out, I began to doze off. And I thought, right now, this is when I have to actually be at my most active. I actually have to get my piece out now. So for 3 or 4 days, I actually had to be at my most alert when I looked like I was going to doze off. So lots of coffee, lots of tea, and hopefully a bit of luck, and I got 3 or 4 pieces out.
Excellent. They were very good pieces as well. I particularly enjoyed the last piece that you just wrote about Fawad. That is something that we're obviously going to have to talk about. But you mentioned
on a blur of caffeine.
Isn't that where all the best writing comes from? I don't even remember how many coffees I had for this. I think my MPhil thesis was probably caffeine, cigarettes, and no sleep. So I think that's where all the best writing comes from. You talked a little bit about the pitch. I am obsessed with this pitch. It is my favorite pitch in the whole of New Zealand. And it's probably for very different reasons than anyone else would have. Talk to us a little bit, because the thing I find really interesting about this pitch is if you're listening to the comms, they will give you a different perspective. If you are somebody who's played on that pitch, they'll give you a different perspective. And if you're watching at home across the world on the TV, you will have a different perspective on this pitch. So talk to us about what your take on this pitch was.
Generally, I think the lazy take is, and I've been guilty of this at times, that all pitches in New Zealand are roughly the same. They look like they're very green. They look like they're going to seam. They're deceptive. Once the first hour, you see the first hour out, you've done most of the hard work. You win the toss, you bowl first. All of those things, in my opinion, need to be reevaluated. Now, I think there was a time when 24 or 25 consecutive tests, whoever won the toss would bowl first. It was a no-brainer. Jason Holder did that a couple of times. I think he got criticized for it a bit too. Pakistan made the most of it to some extent in that they won the toss, they got their early wickets. But then these pitches, I think pitches across New Zealand are quite subtly different. This one received a lot of criticism from the English media last year, I remember, when I think England batted first and New Zealand just piled on the runs and then got them out on the final day. But I thought this was a slower wicket than you'd expect from New Zealand. But you could see there were times when it began to take turns. There was variable bounce as early as the 3rd day, I think. So I don't think it was as slow or dull or dead a wicket as some people might have thought, just looking at the scorecard, looking at maybe Pakistan scoring at less than 2 and over, and even New Zealand initially in the first innings taking their time to score their runs. But from people who've actually been there, who played there, or even watched cricket there, I think they'd have a more informed perspective. I'm just a little curious and a little unsure, but I do think that pitches in New Zealand are a lot more variable than we give them credit for abroad.
I'm so glad that you said that, because I had a conversation with Adam the other day where I said to him, the most interesting thing about moving to New Zealand for me has been the change in how I perceive the pitches. It is so easy watching from far away to see that green color. This entire country is very green. It's just the color of the country, in all honesty. And it does.
Is that because it's pissing down all the time?
Well, I've come from a country that rains even more. Well, this is what I said. From an untrained eye, or maybe somebody who doesn't have hands-on personal experience, it looks like it's similar to England, and it's not. This country grows watermelons and papayas and avocados, which means it's nothing like England. The ground isn't like England. The soil is a different type of fertility. And then, of course, the art of making a pitch and what groundsmen do is totally different as well. Instead of telling you what I think, I used to think the exact same thing. And that is why I love this pitch, because it is so different to what we expect from what we will see in the next couple of days at Hagley as well in Christchurch. Very different type of wicket. Adam, do you want to come in and maybe talk a little bit about the wicket? And I think Danyal's assertions there were actually really accurate. As early as the third day, you're going to see turn, you're going to see variable bounce. Personally, if I was Pakistan, I would have batted first, simply to avoid batting in the fourth innings on a pitch like this. I think Pakistan was probably lucky that New Zealand don't have a test spinner. Mitchell Santner's a guy, but he's not a test spinner. If you had taken any test spinner to that ground on the fourth day, I think Pakistan would have been skittled out for, God, maybe like 80 to 100, maybe 120 runs max. We would not have seen it get anywhere near as exciting as we did. A lot of turn on offer. It's just that the spinner that New Zealand have at their disposal is probably one who is not able to capitalize on that. Adam?
Well, interesting. Like, I actually thought the pitch was really good for a start. And I actually think Pakistan were right to win the toss and bowl first as well. And, you know, they made early inroads, obviously, in that first session. And I think that was probably, in their thinking, the best opportunity to really get deep into the New Zealand batting order. But, you know, Kane Williamson again, you know, he came along and scored another 100. So, you know, if they could have got through Kane Williamson, then there would have been an opportunity to get, you know, deeper into the New Zealand batting lineup. And even they had a few opportunities. I mean, Kane Williamson could have been given out LBW if Pakistan would have reviewed late on the first day. Henry Nicholls was dropped by Mohammed Abbas on the boundary as well. So, you know, they had their opportunities. But obviously, Kane Williamson is a linchpin at the moment. He's in great form, #1 batsman in the world by the ICC rankings. So I think it was a good decision to win the toss and bowl first. In terms of the actual pitch itself, look, I think the pitch was great. Offered some assistance early on for the seam bowlers. The pitch got better to bat on. Then it started taking a bit of turn. It deteriorated a bit as the match went along. From a Pakistan perspective, they didn't get to bowl on the last day. So it would have been interesting to see how Yasir Shah would have bowled on that pitch. I mean, obviously, as you pointed out, Mitchell Santner isn't in that world-class bracket. You know, an Ashwin, a Shah, Jadeja, Lyon, you know, would have been interesting to see how those guys would have bowled on that pitch. But all in all, like, I thought it was a really, really good pitch. Because the thing is, the New Zealand pitches don't tend to break up like pitches overseas. So you never really see spinners come into play. And I think that's where this pitch was a little bit different. Shah, we know, is a world-class leg spinner, and leg spinners, wrist spinners can basically turn it on anything. But he was getting great turn, you know, early on day two.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on from the pitches, and I'm actually really glad to hear two distinct but somewhat converging perspectives on the quality of those pitches that we got to see. Moving on from that, let's talk about how, in your perspective, Pakistan did, and how, in your perspective, New Zealand did. Adam, since you're a supporter of the team that walked away with a win, how do you feel they did, and how was that a test of their strengths, and where were their glaring weaknesses?
Well, number one, wasn't it great to actually have a competitive test match for a change? And I think after the West Indies series, actual cricket fans wanted to see a really good contest. And even as a New Zealand cricket fan, I wanted to see this team challenged in periods throughout the test match. And I think Pakistan did that to an extent, you know, especially with the ball. You know, I guess New Zealand were going at, you know, 2 runs and over, but that's been New Zealand's style for the last, you know, few years under the captaincy of Kane Williamson. It's a bit of a different approach than when under Brendan McCullum's captaincy. They tend to look at wearing out opposition. And Pakistan, I thought, bowled really well in the first innings. You know, Shaheen Shah Afridi, 20 years old, is going to be a great for Pakistan. He's a generational talent. Naseem Shah struggled a little bit, but, you know, to be fair to him, he hasn't really had a lot of bowling on this tour. Only just the one, you know, tour match in Whangarei against New Zealand A. Yasir Shah didn't really come into play in the first innings. I thought Faheem bowled really well as well. And then you had Mohammed Abbas, who kept it tight, as we know that he can. Probably didn't quite get his length right, but I thought all in all, our batsmen were challenged in the first innings. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it was just Kane Williamson was the one that stood up, and with the way he bats is able to really grind the opposition. Unlike a lot of other batsmen in world cricket, he doesn't give a lot of opportunities to the opposition, and I think looking around that, New Zealand can kind of build their innings around his batting, and I think in this Test match, it was again a case of us assessing the pitch was a little bit slower, us ensuring that we didn't lose too much wickets, grinding good bowling down. I think in terms of the New Zealand side, I think Tim Selby bowled exceptionally well. Again, proving in home conditions he's a handful. Big Cole Jamieson. Look, I mean, what can you say about the guy? I mean, his Test career record at the moment is incredible, and I think we wanted to see what he would do under pressure. And I think on that final day, his wicket of Rizwan, swung the game New Zealand's way, broke the game open. I think without that wicket, Pakistan probably go on to draw that match. So it was his wicket at that vital time that kind of showed that he can actually bowl under pressure.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair assessment. I do think that there were a couple of opportunities to really test New Zealand, to actually shake this belief that all of us have about New Zealand being an unbeatable team at home, and I think the opportunities were there. I think one of New Zealand's biggest weaknesses, because it's not really been tested, is when the anchors, when the enforcers that are Kane Williamson and Ross Taylor are not able to perform, what happens? Who steps up and who falls apart? We know BJ has historically been very good, particularly in batting with Colin de Grandhomme, who wasn't playing in this game. But BJ had a bit of a so-so match. You can't call it a poor performance, but he didn't really step up either. So I think had that partnership of Taylor and Williamson been broken a little bit earlier, and then obviously that next partnership with Watling broken earlier, I think New Zealand would really have had some serious issues. They wouldn't have been able to rack up the total that they did in the end. We've seen Henry Nicholls have a difficult year. Some of that came to the fore, I think, with that really, really ugly 100 that we saw him score against the West Indies that was full of missed opportunities. Really, the West Indies gifted him 100 and he walked it over the line. It wasn't the easiest 100 to watch, just because you could see a man that is struggling with form. And I think that would have really come out in this game. But the massive difference between Pakistan and New Zealand in terms of batting is, you have that anchor pair that is just always successful. Always successful. They always come through. And it's nice to see Ross Taylor get a little bit of form as well. But in addition to that, Pakistan just doesn't bat deep enough. Pakistan's bowling, however, is probably just as varied, despite a lot of inexperience in comparison to New Zealand's years and years and years of experience in that very formidable and balanced bowling lineup that they have. But I think that we would have seen an incredibly different match had those partnerships, those two key partnerships, been broken a smidge earlier. Danyal, what are your assessments of how New Zealand did, strengths and weaknesses, and Pakistan?
So you did talk about New Zealand's anchors in Williamson and Taylor. The thing that slightly I think should worry Pakistan is, I thought New Zealand's main weakness is the top order, the top two, the openers essentially. Against the West Indies, I think they struggled to get any partnerships going in the first innings against Pakistan. Both of them fell early. And I know Latham generally is considered one of New Zealand's best openers over the past 10 years or so, but recently I don't think his form has been the best. And Tom Blundell, he's been shunted up and down the order a little in his short career. He, I think, started at number 8 where he got 100. Then he's been asked to open. So he is a team man. But then New Zealand went on and those two built up a 100 partnership in the second innings. I know there wasn't as much pressure, but Pakistan needed to bowl them out cheaply. And so initially they attacked and they failed to get early breakthroughs. So it's all very well saying New Zealand's anchors, New Zealand are heavily reliant on their anchors. But against Pakistan, if you remember, the one that in my preview for the first test, I said that Henry Nicholls was slightly one to watch, because if you looked at his career before 3-match series in the UAE against Pakistan, he wasn't a lock in that side. I think he averaged early 30s, or maybe even less than that. And then he scored a couple of really gritty half centuries, and then that 100. And it was by razor-thin margins, essentially. New Zealand walked away with that series. Perhaps it could have just as easily been 2-1 the other way. So I think and if you look at his record since, that's when he sort of made himself a mainstay in that middle order. So for New Zealand, it's hard to pinpoint weaknesses, but I still think the openers are where Pakistan can make their biggest gains, because Pakistan is sensational with the new ball. And obviously with Kane Williamson, he didn't really give you many chances, but this wasn't a completely chanceless innings. I think there were a couple of tough slip chances that they could have taken, and as you say, that would have been a different game. But then if New Zealand's openers are coming back into form, we know how good their pace bowling quartet is, then it doesn't really leave many weaknesses, except maybe Mitchell Santner. As you say, he's not quite he doesn't quite have the quality that maybe a number one test side should. But other than that, yeah, New Zealand are a really well-rounded side. So if you look at them, when they don't have Kane Williamson, they still beat the West Indies by an innings. When Pakistan don't have Babar Azam, they just look a really, really hollow batting line.
Yeah, I think that difference of missing Babar was just absolutely huge. And moving towards who stepped up for Pakistan, I think that's actually a really important thing to point out. If you are missing a linchpin that is as important to your side, who bats long, bats deep, and then racks up runs without anybody really realizing as well, like Babar, you're going to need several people to step up. I think the makeshift captain did that exceptionally well. I have long been a massive fan of Mohammed Rizwan. I'm a wicketkeeper myself, so it has been years and years of begging for Pakistan to produce a genuine world-class wicketkeeper. Rizwan is probably the first talent I saw that could reach that level. We've got another young one waiting in the wings who's obviously on the A tour at the moment, which is really nice to see as well, but it's been a long time coming. To me, the improvements that have happened for Mohammed Rizwan in the past 3 or so years, domestically, then at the PSL, and now at the international level, that he's been given a genuine run for the first time in his career, they mean a lot to me. And to me, they show a potential leader. They show a team man. If the PCB was letting me make decisions, I probably would have thought about him even more strongly for the captaincy than he was thought of. But that's because I'm English. So I very much do not believe in the concept of taking your best batsman and sticking the captaincy role with him. I don't think that Root's been a great captain, for the last few years, but I think he's a phenomenal batsman. And I am a fan of the concept of letting your best batsman just bat. If someone is a natural, not everybody is Virat Kohli or Kane Williamson, that they are both the most important players in the side or the best batsmen, and they are natural leaders. It's great when you have that in one package, but it's not for everyone. So it's going to be interesting if Babar does come back for me to see his captaincy in a away test at this level against a side that is so very complete. But while Rizwan stepped into the role, I thought he did a fantastic job, both with the captaincy and with a bat. Danyal, what were your views?
Rizwan is both, he's a gem of a player, and he's a wonderful team man as well. So I have to be slightly careful about what I say, because as you know, the Rizwan Sarfraz wars in Pakistan are pretty intense. But and being from Lahore, I can't be seen to favor Rizwan. But I should say though, for a couple of years when Sarfraz was captain and he was a lock for all three formats, Rizwan just worked away on the domestic circuit. He did well. He didn't throw his toys out of pram. He didn't complain. There were times when I thought maybe Sarfraz could have been rested, because it's always good to have your second choice wicketkeeper play some international cricket. So when that didn't happen and he got his chance, it was an interesting circumstances. Sarfraz had just been stripped from the captaincy, all three formats. There was intense scrutiny on him. Just this series, he was told he wasn't really a T20 batsman, not a T20 opener, certainly. So whenever he's been put under pressure, he manages to find a way to step out of his comfort zone and still find a way to deliver. So obviously behind the stumps, that's where he's comfortable. He's by far the best wicketkeeper in Pakistan. We all know he was sensational in England, and he didn't really make many mistakes against New Zealand either. But I slightly worry that at the moment Pakistan are relying too much on him. He's a good, solid batsman, but they can't be relying on him to score half centuries in 70s and 80s from the lower middle order. At some point, that purple patch is going to dry up, and if he's going to be captain, which he's not for a while, he is going to need support from obviously Babar Azam, but obviously the openers and the rest of the batsmen, which he didn't really get in this first test.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair assessment. I mean, it's no one man can carry a team by themselves, especially in a batting lineup like that. And having Babar missing, that was very obvious, particularly in the first innings where Fawad Alam didn't come out to play. Let's talk a little bit about the openers before we move on to every Pakistani's favorite topic, which is Fawad Alam.
So this is both a concern and something that Pakistan at the moment in the short term can't really do much about. So Imam ul Haq's out, obviously. Shan Masood's worked really hard, but other than that 100 in England, he hasn't really had too much to show for it. That is a concern because once again, Shan is a great guy, and I know he works really, really hard. And he's one of the better thinkers in the Pakistan side. So he's always going to be analysing his game. Once again, he's not the most talented, but it's his hard work that's gotten him into the side. After he was dropped, I think 5 times. He played 12 tests over 5 different stints in 6 years. So it hasn't been easy, but whenever he's come back, he's taken his opportunity. And so once again, he's struggling a little. Abid, I'm inclined to be slightly less worried about. I think he has a slightly more solid technique and temperament for this kind of game, especially in New Zealand, where initially you need to be patient. I think he was slightly unlucky not to have more to show for it this test. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he chips in with a half century or a decent, substantial contribution second test.
I have asked many people to explain Shan Masood to me because, everybody tells me what a great guy he is, and that's great, but let's talk about him as a cricketer. If you look at the number of 50s and centuries that he has, for somebody with an average of around 30, it's a little bit confusing that somebody with, let's call it a very mediocre average. Very mediocre average. In England, anytime we have an opener with an average of 30, we're like, no, where's the next one? Not this guy, we need better.
How's that worked out?
It has worked out not well at all, absolutely. And now Joe Denley's making 30s for us instead. So it's a difficulty that I think a lot of countries have. Being an opening batsman is a thankless...
Sorry to interrupt. One thing I'd quickly say is, with Shan, the argument is, I know it's a slightly selective argument, if you take out his first 12 tests, because he was a completely different player. He played 3 tests and then 2, and then he was dropped. So he played those 12 tests across 5 different stints. And since then, he's remodeled his game. I think before the England series, he averaged around 50. He was the best batsman Pakistan had in South Africa. His weaknesses have started coming to the fore again. I guess just keep him away from Jimmy Anderson, because that does that to someone like Shan. But other than that, I still think it would be harsh to do away with him after they've invested so much faith in him and then kept going back to him for 5 or 6 years.
And look, I guess the reality is that if you don't look at domestically who are amongst your best openers, where are you going and why? If domestic cricket exists to help us feed into the international sphere, then you're going to have to look at it. So no short-term solutions for the question of openers. How about the question of who gives way if and when Babar is ready?
I've slightly gone blank on who played at number 4 and 5.
So 4 and 5, 3 was Azhar, 4 was Fawad, 5 is Rizwan, and then 6
I think 5 was Harris. 5 was Harris.
Oh, yeah, Harris. Ooh, not a good sign if you're completely missing out a player about his game.
So that's what I was going to say. I think Harris is probably the one feeling the pressure most of all. Azhar Ali couldn't really complain if he was the one who was dropped. But I think it's his 100 in the UK that's probably going to continue to keep him in the side. And the fact that he was captain so recently, I think it would be quite a big call for Pakistan to drop him, not have him, or obviously Asad Shafiq, who's not even there. You know my feelings about Asad Shafiq. So to have those two completely missing from the middle order, I think would be a gamble that they wouldn't want to take. They did okay in England without Faris Sohail at times. So I think he's the one that they might view as most dispensable, given that obviously Rizwan's the keeper and Faheem's place, I would say, now is secure. He bowled well, he batted well, he'll be okay.
I know Adam has a slightly different take on the question of who misses out, and I think it'll be interesting to hear it because it's a very different New Zealand perspective. But I think it's interesting that you're talking about dropping Haris, and it's a fair call after what we watched this last game. I think he was probably the player who gave it away the most. Set himself up well, did some of the hard work, and then played some kind of stupid shot to absolutely throw it away for no reason. But I do think it's interesting because after Fawad Alam, he probably has the most Bradman-esque average in domestic cricket in Pakistan. He has a history of racking up runs. And then I guess we have a history of an inability to trust in those players or allow them to flourish or expect more of them maybe. Adam, what do you think about the question of who drops out for Babar?
Interesting. Like, I mean, obviously Haris Sahel played 2 poor shots in the first test. So he would be the one, I guess, under pressure. But then, you look at the opening slot, and the Pakistani openers didn't bat well in the first test match. So I'm wondering if Babar does come back for the second test, would there be a thought about putting Azhar Ali up to the opening position? I mean, he bats at number 3. I mean, he was coming on early in the innings anyway. So, for me, if you win with Azhar Ali opening and batting line, it looks a little bit stronger. And then adding Babar in there, if you've got Haris obviously at 5, Rizwan at 6, and Faheem at 7.
How do you feel about that, Danyal?
I think that's an interesting call. He's played a lot of Test cricket batting as an opener, so in that sense, it shouldn't be something that's completely unfamiliar to him. The only thing I would say is if you're that badly out of form, if you're in need of a confidence boost to the extent that Azhar Ali is, I don't think sending you up first ball against the new ball against Port and Saudi is going to do much for your confidence. So in that sense, I don't know if Azhar himself would fancy it. I think given that he's been struggling, he might find it nicer to drop down a slot, even if he comes in fairly early, given one of the openers inevitably gets out early. I do think that given that Haris wasn't on, I think this is actually a big thing with Pakistan because in terms of what they'll actually do, not necessarily what they should do, but given that Haris missed the England tour, Haris was injured for the series again in South Africa. In Pakistan, if you're not really playing the series at times, it's very easy to view a player as dispensable. And so given that he has, for example, Asad Shafiq has played 70 tests maybe on momentum. It's just nice to have him there so you continue getting him there. Haris has kept missing games in series here and there. So given that he's done that, I do think they'll find it easier to drop him than to make a change at the top of the order. Having said that, given that, as Adam correctly said, Azhar comes in so early, it might not make such a huge difference if he opens too.
And Azhar Ali actually looked pretty good in the second innings before getting out.
Yeah,
it's a pretty poor shot.
I think that's the problem. Given that he got out so early on the 5th day, people thought overnight, right, so we've got a partnership going, maybe Pakistan can do this. And then he got out in the second over to a very poor shot. And so people thought that he a lot of pressure on the Fawad Alam Mohammed Rizwan partnership, obviously. So I don't know. He's got a good record as opener. In the past 30 years, maybe if you were creating a Pakistani team, maybe he'd be the opener. But right now, it's just his form that I'm worried about.
Do you think if he was to be pushed up to opener for the second test, just another way to look at it, it kind of undermines Pakistan's long-term strategy and trying to create a settled opening partnership? Because if he just does come up the order, we know obviously he's, what he's 35, 36 now. I mean, just for one test match, it kind of just says to those other 2 guys, well, hang on, we don't really have much confidence in you.
Possibly, but over the past year or so, Pakistan's long-term strategy hasn't really been in evidence. So when they got rid of Sarfraz, they got rid of a captain who wasn't in form, and they made Azhar Ali captain, another person who wasn't in form. And so they didn't really get rid of the problem. They just passed it on to another person, and they had to deal with it again. Obviously, he had to be removed after just 8 test matches. I don't even think he deserved to be removed after the England series. He got 100. Pakistan very easily could have walked away with a 1-0 series win. But given they did that, Pakistan don't really at the moment, I think, focus on long-term fixes, especially in the middle of a series. If they think that's the right thing to do, they won't care that it's not necessarily a long-term fix. They just want to make sure they potentially do a better job in the second test.
Can I ask a personal question here? Because everybody has a different take on this. Are you a fan of a short-term fix? Because obviously short-term fixes lead to momentum. Momentum can lead to long-term success. Or would you rather see Pakistan institute a long-term plan?
It's once again, I think it depends on which specific problem you're talking. Are you talking about the openers now?
I'm talking about the question of playing old-fashioned test cricket, a question that we haven't actually talked about yet. But this is it's still a very 90s formula of test cricket. We've seen countries like England, Australia, even India to some extent, move on in the type of cricket that they play. I probably got really excited about a potential win the other day because the last test match I saw before I left England to move to New Zealand was Headingley. And that was just very different. That's very modern test cricket. It's changing the game. It's understanding that sessions can be played with different speeds, with different variations, and you can have a different game plan for every aspect of it. And the one reason that England gets to do that is because we have players that are so variable and are capable of doing different things. Pakistan goes for a much more old-fashioned formula. They don't bat deep enough for modern test cricket. There's possibly not quite enough variation in their bowling, not as much as New Zealand have. I think the quality of Pakistan's bowling, despite the inexperience, is very strong, but there's probably less variation there. So in moving Pakistani cricket into the 21st century, just 21, 22 years late on that. What do we do? How do we go there?
I think the problem with long-term fixes in Pakistan cricket is long-term fixes take a long time. And given the situation at board level at times is so volatile, it's hard to say. It's hard for a coach it's hard for a coach to build up enough credit to say, I'm going to institute a long-term plan. It might involve some short-term pain. It might involve some defeats early on that you're going to have to bear with me for. A Misbah potentially doesn't have that much credit in the bank right now, given that, once again, this is a continuation of the Misbah era when he was captain in terms of the approach and the philosophy, but sadly not in terms of the result. So the problem is, if you play like the way Pakistan played, especially in the first innings, you'd better win, because if you're not no one's having fun watching you back like that, so you might as well get a win out of that. Given that Pakistan did neither, I don't think Misbah is someone who can say, okay, we are going to can that. First of all, I don't think it's something that comes naturally to him. It'd be very hard. Self-preservation is a very strong goal with Misbah, and to be fair, it's taken him places. It took him to become the longest-serving Pakistani captain. He captained till he was 43. He became coach just 2 years later in interesting circumstances. So I think there's definitely a case to be made that Pakistan needs to, as you say, move into the 21st century. But for example, I never for a moment thought Pakistan were going to go for that target, even when Rizwan after tea came out playing those two shots. It's just not the way Pakistan do things right now. You remember when Misbah took over as captain, the first couple of series, Pakistan batted out 2 fifth-stage draws when they potentially won one against New Zealand, I believe.
Yeah.
Or was it? Yeah. So they could have gone for those. New Zealand would have gone for those. I don't see it happening. I'd love to be there when it does happen, but I don't see it happening anytime soon.
Daniel, what was your thoughts about Mohammed Abbas being made night watchman? Because I felt like at the time, I could see why Pakistan decided to put him in ahead of obviously Azhar Ali with only a few overs left. But I actually thought that his innings kind of, in a way, took a lot of the momentum away from Pakistan's innings. I know, his one of 50-odd balls looked great, but I felt it kind of slowed down the run rate. And I think he batted probably too long. And you could kind of see, obviously, the pressure going on Ali at the other end. And I'm just wondering, whether, maybe looking back, that wasn't a great decision.
Possibly. It's an interesting thing about night watchman, because the previous day you couldn't have faulted what he did. He just needed to see out the day. But then the next day, maybe at times you feel like if they got out, your side would be served better because you'd get to move on. Pakistan never really did that. And while Abbas was blocking out everything that came his way, that's what was happening from the other end too. So yeah, maybe you have a point. I don't really think Pakistan could have foreseen that. Night watchman batting too long sounds like a good problem to have, but usually it only is a good thing if they continue to get runs. So yeah, maybe if he came on the next day and he was instructed to bat a little more aggressively, to take a few risks, it didn't matter if he got out, then it would have been a different scenario. But I think Pakistan just thought, okay, well, as long as he bats and he takes the shine of the new ball, that's going to serve us well. But as you say, yeah, it only halted Pakistan's momentum.
So on the flip side as well, so when Pakistan were trying to save the match, Yasir Shah actually batted ahead of Mohammed Abbas, where I actually thought that maybe Mohammed Abbas having a better technique should have actually been promoted ahead of Yasir Shah. What were your thoughts about that?
Those are the two that Pakistan have used generally as night watchmen. I'm still not completely convinced about whether Abbas is the better batsman. I think over his career, Yasir has been a better batsman than Abbas. And when the two retire, in my opinion, I still think Yasir will end up having the better batting record. Having said that, if you're asking for someone to completely shut up shop, Abbas is probably more your man than Yasir. So that in that sense, I guess I think that's a fair point. But it's just, once again, the same thing. Pakistan are just very rigid. They have this batting lineup and they are not going to change it unless something really obvious happens. So in that sense, it's once again the Misbah approach where we've got this plan, we're going to stick with it and we're going to hope for the best. So at times I feel like they're on autopilot a little too much. They weren't even thinking. I'm sure no one even thought or discussed the possibility of sending one over the other. It was just, this is our batting lineup. Yasir and Abbas, we're just going to send those two out. But possibly Abbas might have been served better if they wanted to shut up shop, which they did. But yeah, I don't think they were really thinking that deeply.
So, Faheem Ashraf, guys. I don't know about, so Adam is a massive fan, but I think all Adam would have seen of Faheem Ashraf are now, this is his second tour to New Zealand, and that's probably what the majority of what Adam has seen. I have never thought of Faheem Ashraf as a test player. I saw his test debut in 2018 in person and thought, okay, he's young, maybe he'll become, test capable. And then when he dropped out from test selection, I thought, yeah, that makes sense. To see him selected for this tour, again, I thought, well, it's a 54-man squad. You need a lot of options there. He probably won't even get a go in test cricket. So to see him named in the playing 11, I was surprised and shocked. But then I haven't been following Pakistani domestic cricket for the last year and a half, maybe. What did you think of that selection, Danyal? Were you surprised by how well he did bat and bowl?
Slightly. I was surprised. I wasn't surprised to see him in the 11 because if you broke down what Pakistan's squad was for that first test, I think they had no choice because they couldn't play Shadab. He was injured, and then you needed someone at 7 who wasn't a tail end. And Faheem Ashraf just about gets. He's still definitely batting a position too high. And the funny thing is, when he got to I think 85 or 90, and the graphic for his 5 best test scores came up, 3 was one of those test scores. So if 3 features in one of your best test innings, you have a lot of work to do to convince people that you are still a batsman. I remember I was in Cape Town and when Pakistan were over in South Africa, and Pakistan were getting beaten as you would expect them to. And I asked Mickey Arthur about the possibility of playing an all-rounder and playing Faheem Ashraf, and he said no, Faheem Ashraf is not an all-rounder. And that to me struck me as interesting for a coach to so unequivocally say that, given that he's done okay as in the UK with the bat. But Faheem is interesting. I don't think I want to analyze him too deeply in the sense that whenever he plays Test cricket, he either contributes with the bat or the ball. But it's just still such a small sample size that it's hard to say what his career will end up being. I still think a very, very strong side doesn't really have a place for Faheem in the 11. But Pakistan isn't that strong a test side just yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I spoke to Yunus Khan about it and tried to, as politely as possible, say, what the hell, man? Why is he a test player? And Yunus Khan basically very clearly said, look, we need all-rounders who can bowl outside of Asia. So we need all-rounders that are not spinners. And I guess that's where it makes sense, doesn't it? His contribution.
And to be fair, he bowled well, I thought. In the first, especially on the first day. He wasn't as incisive as Abbas, but I think he was almost just as disciplined, which I think the management will appreciate.
He also bowled well in the T20s as well. He actually played well in the T20s. Remember in that first T20 at Eden Park when Pakistan were 4 or 5 down. He came out and he played innings which actually kept Pakistan in that match, and even in the match.
He then dropped the match on the boundary with that dropped catch.
Thanks for reminding. Well, at least they got a chance to compete.
No, you're
that
right.
match.
He did. He had a good T20 series, and he followed it into the tests. And actually, I think that bowling wise, he should have more success at Hagley than he did at Mount Mongan. And I do think he bowled very well. I think he was probably bowling at his absolute ceiling and probably batting at his ceiling as well, which is really where you want your players to be, is doing the absolute best that they can. Guys, let's talk a little bit about Fawad Alam. I felt like I was living with a Karachiite when I was watching the match, because all I heard is Fawad Alam's going to make a century. Fawad Alam's going to make a century from Adam over here. And I was like, okay, calm down. I want to see it before you start hyping it up. But then it happened.
Sorry, do you want me to go?
Either of you, happily.
Okay, well, I'll start. I remember when he began in the second innings, he began so cautiously. Someone tweeted me saying, "How did he get 168 on debut? It must have taken all 5 days." And you could see the point. But then again, this is the mystery of Fawad Alam. No one quite understands. Literally no one quite understands why he never got a look in for 10 years. He was making runs every year on the domestic circuit. Yes, his technique was a bit wonky, and perhaps Pakistan had, especially at 3-4-5, they had a fairly settled middle order. But then again, Pakistan have had batting problems since their inception, and there were always series when you thought maybe others a bit out of form, Asad's a bit out of form, maybe Yunus or Misbah could do with the rest, and then even when they retired, he just continued making runs on the domestic circuit. And then if you're not going to value your own first-class cricket system, for 10 years, they had, I think, 6 different systems at first-class level. They had departments, they had regions, they had 16 teams, they had 8 teams. Now they have 6 teams. They had difficult pitches for until 2016 or 17. Then they moved to slightly flatter tracks. Then they moved to greener surfaces. Fawad was scoring runs all this while. He was scoring against the spin. He was patient against fast bowling, as he was against New Zealand. I think for a while he just didn't take on the fast bowlers at all. Then as soon as Mitchell Sankner came on, he attacked him. I think he scored about 6 and over. Batted out a maiden over against Kane Williamson, interestingly. But other than that,
Kane was more penetrating. He did.
He did. Although
he got more turns.
I heard he hasn't taken a test wicket in years, though. But yeah, he did.
I think since 2016, maybe. I think since 2016. But that over where he came on to bowl, I mean, we'd had lots of conversations before the match where I said what New Zealand really needs are real test spinners. And this is the kind of pitch that you go into with 2 spinners, 2 world-class spinners. So they're really going to have an issue with that. If at that time I thought Babar would still be playing when I was having this conversation, and it would have been a very different situation without the requisite spin. And came on, and I got excited because I always loved watching him bowl back in the day when he used to be an actual all-rounder, early years Kane Williamson. And that first over I saw, I looked at it and I thought, if these guys had 2 genuine world-class spinners, they would be absolutely unbeaten. This whole thing would be over early day 4. Like morning session of day 4, this game would be absolutely over. He was getting turned. And I really respected that Fawad said, I'm not going to get out to someone who has not taken a wicket in 4 years, effectively. What I think is really interesting, though, so you're mentioning how Fawad's technique, which has always been to be a little bit cautious against pace and then score against spin. He's very strong against spin. What I find really fascinating is that all these teams have so many analysts. They have so many people crunching numbers and telling you the areas in which a guy bowls or scores or whatever. But there still seems to be very little cross-cultural awareness of people who have played domestically but not on an international level. I think maybe scant Pakistanis or people in the Pakistani management would have heard of, let's say, maybe a Devon Conway, who, of course, like didn't get to have his test debut that I thought he maybe would get this time, but he did play against the West Indies. So no people who would have heard of Devon Conway. Sometimes it's painful to listen to comms talk about someone like Fawad Alam, where all people on broadcast commentary can do is talk about his weird stance, which isn't the first time we've seen it, not just from him, but Shiv Narayan Chanderbal, Steve Smith exists. It would be really nice if we could just get over people with a slightly quirky technique, quirky stance, any of that. But so I was just listening to them, and that's all they were saying. And then Santner came on, and the comms got really interested and excited. They were like, oh, how's this technique going to fare against spin? And I thought, well, if anyone knew even this much about Pakistani cricket, they would know, or what happens domestically, they would know that Fawad's phenomenal against spin. He's got no issues there. And actually, for a very long time, it's probably why some of us thought he wasn't making it into the test side. Oh, he's strong against spin. Most countries don't have, spinners of that caliber. There's no point having him. We need somebody stronger against pace bowling. So it was really interesting to see that from him. Did he do what you expected him to do in this game?
It's hard to say I expected him to score 100. But given that when he was selected against England, you made an interesting point. You said, oh, he's not selected because most countries, especially countries like England and New Zealand, don't have that quality of spin, but they do have strong pace bowlers, and that's why Fawad generally isn't selected. But then, why wasn't he selected for Sri Lanka, but then finally was thrown in for both England and New Zealand? It made no sense. So in terms of trying to analyze when Fawad should have been selected and when he shouldn't have been, I try not to do that because it's just impossible to unpick what were actual selectoral decisions with whatever the hell else was going on. So without sounding like a conspiracy theorist, I try not to get into that. But then when it comes to, Fawad has been a great problem solver. In domestic cricket, it's not like the quality of domestic cricket bowling is rubbish. It's pretty good in Pakistan. And at times the pitches have been really, really difficult to bat on, both in terms of difficult to bat against pace and difficult to bat against spin. And he's found a way to solve those problems. So yes, in the first innings, he played a poor shot to get out. I don't want to be too harsh, but he did play not the best shot to get out in the second innings as well. But that was obviously after a Herculean effort, after a lot of patience that he had shown. So in that sense, he did solve a problem that obviously he knew had persisted since the England series. But then that's what he does. That's what he's been doing for 10 years. And regardless of which level, in my opinion, you score runs at, when you score runs, it does give you confidence. And so Fawad will back himself time and again to stay at the crease for a long time to get the runs that he needs to get.
What's the feeling for you, Danyal, going into the second test, which starts tomorrow, weather permitting?
I still think New Zealand, like I said earlier, I think New Zealand are heavy favourites because Pakistan, I think the scoreline is slightly deceptive. I still think it's easy to forget how many sessions New Zealand dominated in terms of how few contributions from Pakistan made this an interesting test in terms of, in the first innings, it was just one batting partnership from Pakistan that essentially prevented New Zealand from having potentially a 300-run lead. And then in the second innings, obviously, it was one partnership. There wasn't much coming either before that or after. So in terms of that, I do think obviously Faheem's not going to get 90 every game. Even Rizwan feels a little unsustainable for me. And for New Zealand, yes, it's just hard to look past that pace attack. I'm just not sure about the kind of surface it's going to be. Do you think New Zealand are going to play Mitchell Santner again?
No, not at all. Never, ever, ever. Now that I've said that so conclusively, they're obviously going to do it. I think it's probably Daryl Mitchell. I know that Matt Henry has been named instead of Matt Henry's instead of Wagner because he's been ruled out for this test. So they're gonna rest him, play Matt Henry, which makes perfect sense at Hagley for me, which is one of those green surfaces that we think of New Zealand as, but does get a little bit of bounce. Is that right, Adam?
It does, yeah, and I think this is where someone like Cole Jamieson will be even more dangerous. Look, I'm interested to see how New Zealand go without Neil Wagner, because you think about New Zealand's test victories in the last 4 years against Pakistan, at home at Seddon Park in 2016, the 2 wins in the UAE, and also obviously at the Mount, a few days ago. Neil Wagner's been a massive part of that. And I remember at Seddon Park in 2016, Pakistan went to T1 down. And it was his spell at Seddon Park that kind of turned that in New Zealand's favour. And then in Dubai as well, in Dubai and the UAE as well, when New Zealand were looking at staring down at a loss in that first test match. I think Pakistan again were only a few wickets down. Neil Wagner just kept bowling over after over.
Workhorse.
Yeah, absolutely. And he got a vital, I can't remember who it was, but he got some vital wickets that again turned the match in New Zealand's favour. And then Ajaz and Somerville came on and kind of did the rest. So, like, he's going to be a massive loss. He's been a bit of a thorn in the side of Pakistan over the last few years. He's the enforcer. Again, what a performer, bowled with 2 broken toes, in that second innings. And again, he broke the game open. Him and Cole Jamieson. That wicket of Fawad Alam was huge. And again, it was that persistence bowling a short ball. Not many bowlers in that situation would have been brave enough to keep bowling the short ball. and he did, and he trusted it himself.
I read yesterday that Neil Wagner has a fear of needles. Is that right? I didn't know that. He seems like such a tough guy. And then
I'm gonna ask him now.
yeah. Apparently he has a fear of needles, so that's why he didn't want to get whatever pain-killing injection he wanted to get. So I thought Neil Wagner doesn't seem like the kind of guy to be afraid of needles, but apparently so.
I always find it really entertaining where like you get these like big beefy guys like covered in tattoos and stuff, and because my first career was medicine, so I would be in hospitals working as a junior doctor, and the funniest guys that would come to you were like shaved heads, tattoos everywhere, and you'd be like, okay, I'm just gonna give you you'll feel a small prick, and they just look at you with like this fear in their eyes, and you're like, dude, come on, don't be a big baby. And that's what it feels like with Wagner. He was steaming in, seemed to have no issues with his bowling. And then we did a post-match with him, and he was gingerly like limping towards like the conference room area. And I was like, you can't walk on that. And he was like, yeah, for some reason, walking on it is a lot harder than bowling it. But he did say that he bandaged it up. And when he took his boot off, that's where he actually like felt the pain. I've broken toes before, and I broke toes surfing, not taking wickets, obviously. And it is a funny one because when you're wearing shoes and you feel bandaged up and nice and constricted, you're like, yeah, this is fine. It's the second that you take them off where you're like, oh my God, where did all that pain come from? So I think no Wagner is going to be a little bit of an issue, but personally, I think Matt Henry, I mean, he's not the quality that Wagner is, and it's definitely not a like-for-like replacement, but I think for this pitch, it makes sense, in all honesty. Mitchell Santner makes no sense, so I think the fact that Colin de Grandhomme is probably still injured, I have seen him getting closer to being okay. In all honesty, if CDG is fit, I think it's going to be really bad for Pakistan.
You just want to see him bowl without the cap on, don't you? You want to see what that hair looks like. I just want
to see his like long locks like flowing. I think he's great. I think he is an incredibly underrated part of New Zealand's success as a unit over the last few years.
I don't think you need to tell Pakistan how good CDG is. He comes into his own against Pakistan.
Good point. Batting, bowling, a little bit of everything, really. But I actually think that if you have an all-rounder, they should not be a bits and pieces all-rounder. They should not be someone like Mitchell Santner, who for me is neither good enough with a ball nor good enough with a bat. His best component of his cricket is probably Yeah, everyone thinks I'm very harsh about Mitchell Santner. Look, we're not talking about cricket in general. We're talking about genuinely calling yourself the number one.
I don't think there's been enough appreciation for how good the catch was. It was a good catch, the one that won the game.
I was just about to say the best component of his cricket is his fielding.
And his run out as well of Rizwan. That actually kind of...
It was a very important run out.
Pakistan's first innings. I agree with you know that I agree with you, Taz. I completely agree with you in terms of Mitchell Santner. To kudos to him, he bowled pretty poorly on day 5, but then he ended up getting two last wickets, didn't he, to win the game and that catch. So I think that's probably guaranteed him another 10 tests as a specialist spinner. I would have thought.
Not at Hagley though. Not at Hagley.
No,
it doesn't make sense to keep him at Hagley. I think it's probably going to be Daryl Mitchell, which is probably.
Did anyone notice, by the way, that the last time Fawad Alam played a test in New Zealand, that was the game in Dunedin in 2009, and that also ended with a carton bowled by a left-arm New Zealand spinner. That time it was Dan Vittori. I think New Zealand won by 30 runs on the final day. I thought that was a bit eerie in terms of the similarities.
I think that's the thing that should be tweeted.
Was it the one where Shane Bond got some wickets on the last day? Is that the one? And was it Umar Akmal's test debut where he got 100? Is it?
Yep, that's the test. It was an amazing test match in many ways. And then Pakistan needed, I think, 245 to win on the final day. It looked like all 3 results were possible. And then, Shane Bourne broke the game open. And then at the end, I think there was a 40-run partnership, either the 9th wicket or the 10th wicket. And Pakistan looked like they might do something interesting. And then Vittori struck with the I think.
So you're just describing like the concept of being a Pakistan fan now. It's the almost, and then no, every single time. And you'd think that some of us would learn, but we haven't. Okay, guys, just to wrap this up, obviously we all think that New Zealand are heavy favorites going in to this final test. Shame it's only a 2. I think it's a massive shame to have a tour that far away, that includes a 2-week quarantine, and then only have a handful of matches. We all know why. We know why we have moments like this, but I think 5 T20s and we would have seen some crazy good cricket, 3 test matches and we would have seen some really good cricket. So that's a shame. One question that I want to ask Danyal and then Adam for the flip side of it is, what has been thus far your standout Kiwi moment, Danyal? And then Adam, if you could tell me your standout Pakistani moment.
So this one's easy for me because I wrote a piece about it. I still think it's slightly weird how little appreciation, relatively little appreciation, Tim Southee gets as a bowler. Especially when it comes to Southee and Bolt, people talk about them as a pair. And then whenever people talk about those two as a pair, they talk about Bolt as the senior partner, and then Southee as the sidekick. And I sometimes maybe that has weight, but I'm a massive fan of the way Southee bowls. And I'm also a massive fan of his consistency. Recently, I think in the T20 series, Bolt didn't get any wickets, and Southee now has, I think, 90 T20 wickets, so he's the 4th highest test bowler. Bolt is way back. In this test and the test against the West Indies, especially in the first innings, he was the one who was breaking the game open. Bolt struggled to get wickets. So it's just nice for me to see. Brendan McCullum actually made an interesting point about this on TV. He said that in the last 19 tests, Tim Southee has 92 wickets. Shane Bolt built an entire career where he had 87 wickets, I think, in 18 tests, and that's considered one of the best test fast bowling careers for New Zealand. So in that sense, he's only 32. He's now got over 300 wickets. He's just a massive asset to New Zealand, and I still think New Zealand don't quite fully appreciate how good of an individual bowler he is, even if you separate him from Bolt and the new ball in general.
Danielle, that's really interesting because a lot of us, a lot of New Zealand fans have always thought Trent Bolt was the spearhead, and probably up until a few years ago, he was always the one that was getting always the opening wickets or the vital breakthroughs. But in the last couple of seasons, it's actually been Tim Southee at test level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has changed. But I thought for a while, around the time the 2015 World Cup started and the 2 years after that, I thought there was maybe a chance that Tim Southee might begin to fade. We all know he started, I think, 3 or 4 years before Trent Bolt did. That's when he got his chance. I'm never quite fully clear on why Bolt didn't start that early. But anyhow, so I thought maybe because he started early, he might be one of those early bloomers that begins to burn out.
Peters out. Yeah.
Yes, by 2016 or 17, because between 2015, the World Cup, and then the next 2 or 3 years, Bolt was by far the better bowler. He was younger. He was a little quicker. He was getting more swing. He was the one who got the big IPL contracts. Even this season, he played the IPL. He played the finals. Southee wasn't really anywhere near. But in Test cricket, Adam's right. At least from what we see since 2017, Southee's been the one who's taken over the mantle in terms of being the senior partner, the most experienced bowler, and obviously the most prolific one. But it's just good to see that Southee's not really close to being done yet, and potentially both these bowlers, and Southee especially, could maybe go on to have a really long career.
Funnily enough, this entire thing that you've said, we had this conversation over coffee this morning, and we talk about it quite a lot because I think you're absolutely right. In their early careers, Bolt looked a little bit ahead of Southee. It looked like Southee was the one benefiting from that bowling partnership and improving his numbers a little bit. And that has very much changed over the last few years. I think it's probably helped that Southee has realized or turned himself into a little bit of a specialist bowler. He's dropped out from ODIs. And you know, he's kept himself to T20, or the side has kept him to T20s and Test cricket, and I think that's exactly what he is.
Has he dropped out from ODIs completely?
Sometimes, not always. If you remember, he didn't get really a look in the World Cup. It was Matt Henry selected over Tim Southee the entire time, and it makes sense to me. I think he is a better Test cricketer than he is. His value in limited overs cricket comes with the bat. But when you're batting really deep anyway, then I think you probably don't need that. Even in, I think, Australia, the series where New Zealand toured Australia about this time last year, he bowled exceptionally well. And I don't think that you don't normally think who's going to bowl well in Australia. Oh, a guy that gets it up to 135 kilometers an hour. That's, you know, it's not a natural thought that goes together, but I think he was very accurate. He looked dangerous at times, and he just kept plugging away even when he wasn't getting the returns. So Tim Southee has been phenomenal. I think it'll be really interesting to see just how long he will play, because I might be biased because I might be around the same age bracket, but 32 is not old. 32 is not old at all. We have started changing our mind in society about what makes an old athlete, particularly in cricket. Fast bowlers obviously wear and tear a little bit faster than everybody else does. That goes with what the nature of what it is that they do. But 32 is not old. If you're feeling right, if your mind's in it and your body's working okay, I don't see why it's a problem. I regularly watch a 40, almost 41-year-old man field at short leg faster than 18-year-olds do in English county cricket, but still, I don't think that that's the thing that we need to be worrying about. His mind is still very much in the game, and he still thinks that he can achieve a lot of things. I don't think that Kiwi culture is the most ostentatious. I think that people prefer to be quiet about their desires and what they hope to do with their careers. But I think if that man was honest and said it like it is, he would tell you that he would have his eyes on becoming New Zealand's #1 bowler in terms of stats and records, and he would be happy to play until 38 to do that if necessary. But yeah, he's been a fantastic team man, and it was great to see his 300th wicket. Adam, what has been your standout Pakistani moment of this series thus far?
Just quickly going back to Tim Southee for a minute, the one
Yeah.
thing is that he's actually kept himself really fit, and he hasn't had a lot of injuries. And as you point out, he could go in another 5 years and challenge to Richard Hadley's wicket tally of 431 wickets. I used to always think it was Trent Boult that could do it, but Trent Boult, probably since the 2015 World Cup, has had a couple of injuries which have, kind of stalled his career a little bit. Last year in Australia, he was injured before the tour, and I think even the tour in 2015 as well. So I think Tim Southee, out of both of them now, you'd say that he's the one. Not only is he fit enough, but his style of bowling probably means that he's probably out of both of those two, the one that would be more likely to have a good cricket. So Richard Hadley's 431. Stand-up performance, I'm going to say Neil Wagner with 2 broken toes. We all know...
It's supposed to be a Pakistani choice.
Oh, Pakistani choice.
Yeah, that's the whole shtick, okay? I asked Danyal who his Kiwi performance was. I asked you who your Pakistani one was. I get to talk about both because I'm neutral.
So I just missed the memo there. Well, you know who it's going to be, right? Actually, this is a hard choice for me because I've got Faheem. This is Faheem, who I said at the very first T20, who I was backing all the way on this tour. Fawad Alam, you know that I've always thought he was amazing. And, the myth, the man, the legend. One of the greatest domestic records of all time. So, I've always liked him. Rizwan, I've always been a fan of because obviously, since he's come into the Pakistan side, he always scores runs under pressure. So those 3 guys, and all 3 guys had great tests. So I don't know what to say. Fawad Alam. Fawad Alam. Okay. I mean, I said to you, this is going to be a career-defining innings for him. And I remember saying to you that he actually needs to score runs.
Every innings is a career-defining innings for Fawad Alam. That's the problem.
But if he would have scored runs, could have been it. His career probably would have been hanging by a thread. Barber probably comes into the second test to replace him if fit. So what a legend. And isn't it good that someone, I'm partial to players in their mid-30s making comebacks. That. We love seeing an old guy come back and do well.
Yep,
isn't
no personal bias there at all.
Isn't it good for the oldies?
It is good for the oldies. I'm just a fan of people born in the end of the 80s doing well, so definitely no bias there either. Excellent.
And partial to a good beard as well, and he's got a good beard. So actually, all the Pakistani boys have good beards. But his beard is particularly impressive.
Very nice moustache.
It is.
But Ish Sodhi is creeping up from behind. I saw him the other day at the T20s, and I was like, Ish, this thing here, it's absolutely rocking it. And he was like, yeah, it's a tribute to my dad.
Fawad's got the best beard in world cricket right now, I would have thought.
Some tight competition too.
Interesting shout, yeah. While I've got you guys, I just want to ask you quickly,
is Rachin Ravindra really good enough to have an excellent New Zealand career? Because I've only looked at him in terms of his scorecards and I think a couple of interviews. He
It's
looked
a really good
recently.
question.
What do you guys think? I thought while I've got you might as well ask.
It's an excellent question, and we have different opinions on this. Okay, Adam, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm in the hot seat. Okay. Look, he's only still a young guy, and like before he played domestic cricket, there were a lot of comparisons with Kane Williamson, which I think is a little bit unfair. You know, because Kane Williamson is going to be one of the all-time great Test cricketers. At the same age, Kane Williamson had already played for New Zealand, so I think that's a little bit unfair. Look, I think the guy's got all the talent in the world. I think he's batting in a really tough position. In the Wellington side, he's opening the batting, and we all know, like, you know, before Christmas, batting on New Zealand decks is probably not the most ideal place to be batting. So I don't think his current first-class record really reflects his ability. I'd like to see him probably drop down the order a little bit, because I think, like as I was saying, it's pretty difficult on our green decks to really get going, and he's really struggled early on in the domestic season. I think he got 100 against West Indies A from memory, and a sixer with the ball. So look, I think he probably is earmarked as the next great New Zealand young talent, along with another guy called Finn Allen. I'll just check his name in there.
So my perspective is only a little bit different. I think last year was the first year that I was here, and the first year that I watched domestic cricket. I saw absolutely nothing to back up the fact that he is a potential great last year. Nothing at all whatsoever. And I was a little bit confused. I was like, well, these guys don't stop talking about him. And, you know, he did well at under 19s, and the Black Caps really back this guy. So what am I not seeing? What am I failing to see? And then obviously Adams pointed out that batting here before Christmas is super tough. I then did it myself after having the batting season of my absolute life in England. I was dismissed once over an entire season. I suddenly thought that maybe I too am Steve Smith. It was amazing. And then I came and batted here.
I wondered if that might come up.
It was actually it was the form of my life, and I played age group cricket, and I played at a decent level, and I thought, hang on a minute, I'm getting older and better. What is this? And then the first day that I picked up a bat in New Zealand, I kid you not, I never wanted to pick up a bat again. I looked at it this way. I was like, sorry?
Was that in Hamilton? Was it somewhere close to Sutton Park where you...
Actually, it was the Bay Oval. It was Mount Maunganui. And it's supposed to be, in all honesty, it's probably a pitch that I would have liked. And I just didn't even see the ball. It was so slow. It was so low. I suddenly felt like my reflexes were totally out of whack. It was really difficult, and it was really disheartening. And in all honesty, it is a completely different art. We say that it is so easy, or it should be easy for professionals to pick up their bat from England and then go to India or go to South Africa or whatever. And it is incredibly difficult thing to do. Obviously, as a professional, this is your job. You don't also have to be good at other things. So it's a little bit different, but I was so hurt and disheartened to find out that I did not secretly become Steve Smith over the course of one summer. And in actual fact, I just had a nice lucky streak. It's hard. It is really hard. He's a very young guy. He's very inexperienced. Then this year, he's had a way better start in the domestic season. I'm starting to see it. I don't think that tour match against West Indies is any evidence either way. Those West Indian boys would have given their wickets away to anyone. It's a matter of whoever stepped up with the ball. That was it. However, I think that there's a thing that Adam always says, and it seems very much true, that New Zealand cricketers mature far more slowly or come into their own far more slowly than some other world cricketers, particularly Pakistanis do. I cannot imagine. Naseem did not have his best test a week ago, but I cannot imagine any Kiwi after Danyal Vittori, who was still a few years older than Naseem when he was doing what he was doing, and he was doing it really poorly. Vittori did not become a good cricketer until much later. When Southee started at the age of 20, he didn't become a good cricketer until much later. Absolutely. Kiwis do seem to mature far more slowly. The fact that everybody has told him, hey, we believe in you, and decided to back him while he matures, to me, that is a sign that we should actually expect great things from him. I think if people who have watched you over the course of 5, 6, 7, 8 years see something in you, and I don't like the phrase, he's the next blah, 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 for anybody. But this entire country, in terms of the administration and the coaching staff, look at him and think, yep, we have something here that is like what we had in Kane Williamson. I think even though I have not personally seen evidence of that, we trust in it. That's my take on it. I'm not entirely convinced he's an all-rounder. I've seen him bowl maybe 2 or 3 times. Okay. But I think Pakistanis have higher expectations of spinners, in all honesty, than Kiwis do.
I think that's a salient point to end on.
And on that note, I want to say thank you very much for being with us, Danyal. It was a pleasure to speak to you and get your take. You're always an interesting analytical voice in Pakistani cricket, because I feel that it's very easy to have personal opinions where you let, whether you're a Karachiite or a Lahori or whether you like a certain player or not, creep into your analysis. And it's hard to avoid it, especially when you've been doing this for a very long time. So it's really nice to have a very well-educated, in terms of Pakistani domestic cricket, and somebody who's been analyzing the game for a fair few years now. So thank you very much for joining us. We hope
I
that
appreciate it. Yeah.
your time with the Cricketeers, and hopefully we'll get to speak to you again soon.
Yeah, no, this was my pleasure. I hope you have me on again. I hope you don't regret bringing me on.
Thank you. Thanks for being with us.
Fine. Take care. Take care, guys. Thanks. Speak to you soon.
Thanks,
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye.